Cool. I just realized I hadn't started filming yet.
Very
Sorry.
important.
I know.
But better for me that you didn't. Thank you so much. Can we just give Rachel a quick round of applause? And we wouldn't be here without, well, first of all, Cross Campus. Thank you so much for giving us the space. Diego has been incredibly helpful. If you ever need a bartender, Joanna is part of the mobile bartender team. They're incredible. But we wouldn't be here without Simplecast. I personally host my independent show on Simplecast, and they have been champions for people of color, specifically podcasters of color, which is really, really exciting in this space. So I'll have Addie and Esprit come up here and talk to you all for a second. Or do you want to talk from back there?
No, I can.
Okay.
So Simplecast is a podcast hosting company. We make it easy to create, share, and amazing analytics for both the independent creator and enterprise level. And the best thing is that you can get started today with a 14-day free trial. We have a couple announcements, actually. We'll be organizing Podcast Movement's second annual Podcasters of Color networking event. But here's the thing, we don't want to do it alone. We want to hear your voices. And we want to engage podcasters of color to ensure it delivers relevant programming and meaningful takeaways to serve the podcast community. So head over to our blog and participate if you're up for it and want to hear and involve everybody's voices in this initiative. Another thing, we have a microphone to give away today to one lucky random winner. But in order to win, you need to fill out this little form. It takes like less than a minute. So I'll pass this around while the discussion starts. So just pass it and you might win at the end. That's it.
Thank you. Okay, so we're going to get started. I think you have to turn on your own microphones. We're really getting adventurous. I will let these amazing panelists introduce themselves, because who could introduce them better than themselves? But I will say one thing, that we all got drinks last week to prepare for this panel, and I have never hit it off with a group of people so comfortably and been so excited about the things that they are talking about specifically in the podcasting industry and about making money in podcasting. So this was totally accidental. I just picked three people I really like separately, and it is really cool, the stuff that they're about to tell you. So I'm super excited for all of you, and I hope you come and introduce yourselves to these people, because they are great, and they're incredibly talented and just important to get to know. So do you want to get started?
I sure will. Hi, everyone. So my name is Gabrielle Horton, and I just realized in 2019 I'm identifying myself as an independent producer. And I say that because I made a huge sort of career switch from being a Democratic political staffer and getting my graduate degree in public policy, and now I am sort of obsessed with telling and sharing stories through the podcast medium. So I spent the past year, and I guess we'll get into this in more detail, spent like the last sort of 8 to 9 months of my graduate school tenure at Michigan Radio, a really big NPR affiliate station, obviously in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I'm sort of working on a daily series stateside, which airs twice a day. And then when I came home to Los Angeles, started working at Crooked Media. And so those were very different experiences, but I gained so much just knowledge and hands-on exposure to what it takes to sort of really make a podcast, working at a bigger company, working at a more traditional public radio station, and I'm really excited to sort of be on my own and sort of now sort of in conversation with other companies and contracts, and I know we'll get into all of that good stuff later. So yeah, I'm the newbie of the group, so I think you'll hear different perspectives, and each of us are at different stages too.
Cool. Hi, my name is Shara Morris. I am a podcast producer for the Marketplace podcast called Make Me Smart. It is hosted by Kyra Isdall of Marketplace and Marketplace tech host Molly Wood. And every week we try to make you smart about all things tech and the economy and culture. And I've been doing that full time since the summer. Before that, I was freelancing for about 4 years. And I was working on a podcast for Adam Ruins Everything. It was the podcast version of the TV show. of the same name, and I was also working and producing Girl Boss Radio, hosted by Sophia Amoruso. So was doing the whole freelance thing for a while, and can definitely talk about that experience and hustling and how to make money that way. What I learned and what I would do differently, which is a lot, and also getting into full-time mode.
Hey, I'm James Kim. I started in radio way back in 2011, I want to say. I was an intern at KPCC, and that was not really paid. They paid me just for the pieces I did. And so, yeah, it got really rough, I'm not gonna lie. And it took about 2 years for me to get back into the business, but once I got back in, I ended up working for KCRW, Radiotopia, Marketplace, and now I'm back at KPCC with Misha as a podcast producer over there. Yeah, and so I kind of have this weird journey where I didn't know what I was gonna do, and we'll talk a bit more about that. It was a hot mess.
So since we're talking about money today, I want to ask all of you, how much money do you want to make, and how far away are you from that? I mean, you can do a reverse order. You want to try something new?
Okay. Yeah, for me, I'll keep it short. I did this interview before I got into podcasting and radio. It was for USC, and I just graduated college, and they asked me, like, what, like, you know, you're a millennial, you don't have a job, like, what do you want? And I'm like, oh my God, all I want is just a job where I can afford a house. I feel like in podcasting that's still ridiculous. You can't really get that anymore. But for me, what I'm making now, I'm comfortable now where I can, like, live with my partner and, you know, shop at Whole Foods if I have to. It's a mark. But ultimately, I think I still have that dream of at least being able to consider buying a house, making podcasts. And for me, that would probably be in the six-figure range, which I'm not there yet. But I'm not, like, that far off.
Give me a number that you want to get to.
And this, I mean, I feel like what's reasonable is probably like 150,000. Yeah, in what, like the next 5 years, I guess? I don't know, that sounds low.
Yeah,
maybe
let's
the next
do the
2
next
years.
5 years.
Oh, next 5 years? Probably like 180, 200 maybe. I'm ambitious.
I feel like I need to say the same thing as a woman. Yeah, I mean, I would love to make six figures. That would be the dream. Definitely not there now. And I mean, it's funny that you say that it would be in the next 5 years, because part of me thinks like, oh, that would happen more like 8 years, if that was even possible. I don't even know. Like, but that would be the ideal, but that would be having to get to a kind of, you know, beyond senior producer, maybe development executive type of person. So, and then maybe even having a graduate degree. I don't know. I think I value that and put that on a pedestal.
This is a pertinent question because I'm sort of in conversations now with like different companies or individuals for different contracts, and I've had to sort of be really frank about it. And it's kind of funny being a woman, like a black woman too. I sort of go to my tribe, like, you know, am I asking for too much? Am I thinking too crazy about it? Because you hear all these like think pieces and whatnot. So I'll just give it to you guys real. I had to sort of figure out my own budget, like what would it take for me to live comfortably, right? So I know what that means for me, but it's gonna be different for you with you, right? And I also thought about, okay, I wanna aggressively pay down the little student loan debt that I do have, I wanna aggressively save. Like I thought about these things in a very sort of, I took sort of one like the liberal approach, like I could really just have everything my way. And then I also thought about it, okay, if I'm being conservative about some of these figures, what does that look like? Talk to some of my girlfriends on the East Coast who've been in this business for a while. They're like, take your liberal figure, add 30%, then divide that by 160 to figure out what you need monthly. And so I was in conversation with someone on Tuesday, and they're like, well, what's your rate? And I said it without, you know, flinching or being timid or anything like that. And I was like, you know, this is what I'm thinking. And he was like, okay. And so I think for me, knowing that I spent like the first, my first year in the podcasting, audio storytelling space, kind of at production assistant or intern level stuff, I'm thinking between 75 and 80K for this year, sort of take home. Now, I can't tell you what the next 5 years.
What's the dream though?
I
For
mean,
5 years from now.
I just want more money. It's just like, I don't know, just like more money. It just, you know, I think it depends on lifestyle, depends if I'm staying in LA.
I put a number on it.
Oh my
That's
God. Okay, I'm just gonna throw it out there. I don't know. I'm gonna go higher. I think 180 sounds low for 5 years from now. Let's just say 200K. I don't know.
I like it.
Why not? I mean, like, if
Yeah.
you shoot for the moons and if you fall a little bit, you're still in good company, right?
Yeah. So Cheryl, let's start with you. What was your first paid gig in podcasting, and how did you get it? And then we'll go around if either one of you have something to add.
Yeah, so first of all, Avishai, you were probably a part of this. So when I actually, speaking of weird routes, so I went to the SALT Institute, which doesn't exist anymore, but it's in the same iteration, but nice. But basically, it's a school where you can study radio documentary. So I did that, and then I moved out to Los Angeles. And at the time, I was wanting to freelance, but I was also really intimidated by freelancing. It was really scary, and I had to build up the confidence to be able to do it. And I happened to have a friend who was working, or she had a slot at a pirate radio station in Chinatown, LA. It was called K-Chong, and she was like, hey, I have this slot open to do this radio show. Do you want to co-host it with me? And having just finished radio school, I was like, yeah, sure. And I mean, she had the slot open because her friend had to go on tour of Barbie the musical, and it was very LA. And so I ended up hosting it with her, and she actually had to leave herself. And then all of a sudden I had this show, this time slot in the middle, like just sitting on my lap. And so I could do whatever I wanted with it. And so I just talked to a really good friend of mine who had no experience in radio, but was super smart and talented, and I was like, let's host this thing together. And so it was such a great time where we could experiment and create this bi-weekly show together, and we did, and we were like, hey, we're actually creating something kind of fun. Maybe we can start freelancing our stories. And so we did, and we would freelance to KCRW and to KQED, and that really helped give me the confidence to be able to be like, oh, this is something I can maybe do. And so those were some of my first paid gigs, and then I went full-time freelance after that.
Do you, Gabby or James, do you want to add anything to that? Your experiences?
Yeah, it's kind of a similar route with Shara that, yeah, I didn't know what I wanted to do after I graduated, and I majored in so many things and minored in so many things in college. I majored in anthropology because it was easy, and I wanted to get out of college, which is a bad idea. And I minored in music, and I combined, and also film, and I combined them all to make like ethnographic films. And I was doing a lot of internships, and it was when I was at a documentary place where once that internship was over, they're like, hey, there's another opportunity at KPCC. I've never heard of public radio or NPR before then. I was like 21, 22. So, you know, my parents don't really speak English, and so we didn't listen to that kind of stuff growing up. So it was I'm not gonna lie, it was a big uphill battle. Like when I first got my first internship, it was not paid, it was just paid on how many pieces that get on the air. Which for me, it was like 2 pieces a month, and they paid about like, I wanna say like $100 a minute, and they were always less than 4. So that wasn't a lot, and I had to do a lot of other side gigs. Like I had to be a server, and I was also at the seafood department at Whole Foods while doing this internship. And then I also did another internship that was also free. And once that ended, I thought, oh my gosh, I did an internship at a national show, and I also got some pieces that won awards. Like I'm gonna be set. And nobody gave me an opportunity. Like nobody looked at my resume. Like it was difficult to the point where I left the industry for a year. And my friend had a job in reality TV, so I became a writer in reality TV randomly. And the sad thing is that like when I went back into radio, I had to take another internship opportunity because nobody knew who I was. even though I worked at all these places and I assumed that, oh, because I have a national show and all these other things under my belt, people still had no clue who I was. So I had to travel all the way to Texas in a very small town and do this internship there. And once I created my own show, that was my goal. So I told myself, okay, if I'm going back into radio and podcasting, I'm going to make a show. And I don't know what that show is, but I want to make my own show and I'm going to create it. Because I've tried all the other ways and no one cared who I was. So I went there and I realized that the small town, everyone believed in ghosts. So I was like, okay, there's only 2,000 people in this town, and if everyone believes in ghosts, I can make a ton of episodes about this. And it and it worked. It got a lot of attention, given how small it was. And I got the attention from this woman named Leah Tal, who started The Moth and also did Strangers on Radiotopia.
Did you reach out to Leah or she reached out to you?
I think she posted on Lula, so that's another important thing. I don't know if anyone's a part of Listen Up Los Angeles, the Facebook group in LA, but you should join it. That's a really great way to network, and that's coming from somebody who hates networking, which is why it took me 3 years to find a job, because I don't like talking to people.
I also had to force James to come here tonight.
That's true, she did. And yeah, and so I reached out to her. She posted some sort of posting on Lula, and it was through that all of a sudden I started getting attention. I showed her this show that I made, and it was a highly produced original score, reported, crazy sound effects. I was trying to be really ambitious, and she was really impressed, and that's what got me hired on Strangers. And then immediately when I came back, then word spread and I got hired on Marketplace. And then all of a sudden, that's when I got my first full-time job at The Frame. They looked at on KPCC. They looked at my resume and they saw this show that I made in this small town called Marfa, called There's Something Out There, and they listened to it and they're like, oh my God, who is this kid? Why has no one picked him up? But the thing about it, and I'll try to end this because I'm talking a lot, is that when I first took my job, I'm gonna be pretty candid about what I was making. They offered me $40,000 full-time when I took my first full-time job in 2014 on KPCC. And 1 year later, our intern, who then became a film producer on the show, he actually was ending up making more than I was, even though I was hired on full-time. And I realized it's because I didn't negotiate my rate. I've never had a full-time job before. I'm always kind of nervous that nobody really wanted me, so I just wanted to accept whatever I wanted. And after that realization, that's honestly when it clicked, where I'm like, okay, fuck this, I'm gonna go for it. And screw people devaluing how much I'm worth. I'm gonna just go much higher and higher and higher, which it's done pretty okay for me.
Sherry, you were gonna add something when James was talking about Lula.
Oh yeah.
Oh, I just totally agree, and I think that, to utilize any sort of resources that are available to you, and I know these things are hard in terms of putting yourself out there and showing people your work, but I completely agree. First of all, just how hard it is when you come to a place like LA and no one knows you and you have to establish yourself and you're like, hey, listen to my stuff and you should have faith in me and hire me, and it's just but you have to go to those events, and Lula was great for me to just start meeting people and to share some of my work too, and that's when I was sharing stuff from Homemade News, and just some of the other pieces that I was working on. So yeah.
How can people find Lula and add themselves to it?
Yeah, so just go onto Facebook and type in Listen Up Los Angeles. And there are other radio groups too. For women, there's Pod Broads. So there's that. And then there's also, then there are bigger, more national ones. For women, there's Ladio. Yeah, that one's good. Radio Women.
Group.
What?
That's an email listserv.
Yeah, that's an email listserv. There's also New York Public Radio Groups. That's a big one. And then there's also another Facebook group is Radio Women Rule the World. So just try, and I see people on there all the time just writing the the whole email group or writing to the Facebook group saying, hey, this is a project that I'm working on, asking for feedback, asking people for advice. We actually took Leah Tao out once when we were working on Homemade News and just like, tell us your story. What do you know? What can I learn from you? And, it's also important to value people's time, and we can get to that later. But, always just trying to put yourself out there, and I know it's uncomfortable and a little squeamish, but to just close your eyes and do it.
So I want to talk a little bit about like the nitty-gritty of starting your own show and making money off of it, because all three of you are in different stages of that process, or have been in that process before. James, you started your own show and got an underwriter to pay for it. Shara, you started 2 shows from scratch, and you're in the middle of starting or working on a show and trying to get funding for it, right? So talk to me about that process a little bit, maybe starting with you. And what are the kinks and what are the things that you found to be successful in making money?
Right, so I can definitely try and help with that. So I don't know if you all know the indie podcast, You Have Me at Black. We're approaching season 6 right now, and so I actually joined the team, I want to say September 2018, so right when I was coming back to Los Angeles. I pretty much wanted to sort of do more around Black millennial narratives, and You Have Me at Black was really awesome with doing just that. Actually sort of got a shout out by IndieWire for like one of the best episodes of last year. So we're really sort of like just doing these really authentic, awesome sort of narrative storytelling that just focuses on us by us, if you will. And so with that team, we were sort of closing out season 5 as I was on the team, but it's a lot right now, especially gearing up in these early parts of the new year, thinking about what does it mean to take You Have Me at Black to the next level, right? So thinking about what's worked really well for the team before, which have been live events. So last year they went to a few cities, including Houston, they were in Los Angeles, traveling around where there's already members of our production team there and hosting these live events. So maybe a space like this or a cafe shop or something like that where you sort of have the people who are going to be the storytellers. They're kind of like up, it's kind of like an open mic, if you will, but it's being recorded. You hear the audience laughing in the background, you hear them say ooh and ah. So you kind of get all of that when you're listening to the podcast, but those have also been ways for You Have Me at Black to generate actual revenue, right? So they can take that money and bring it back to the company as well. And I think right now we've been talking about a lot on a weekly Sunday call is really thinking about how do we identify sponsors that really reflect our values as a team, and thinking about what that looks like, because all of us at this point are contributing to You Have Me at Black on a volunteer level. So now it's sort of talking about breaking, I think there's like maybe 10 of us or so, into subcommittees, and one of the committees will be focused on sponsorship, right, attracting different brands, so that not only are the producers getting paid, maybe it's per month or per episode, but we're having that money kind of come back and seeing those resources return back to the podcast. So those are things that we're in conversation with. If you have ideas about it, happy to sort of listen and hear more. But it's really cool to sort of be a part of that process and kind of thinking about how do we develop a plan that can be sustainable moving forward, and paying the producers who are working on these stories, for each season.
So my situation is a little bit different because when I was freelancing for the different shows, for Adam Ruins Everything and for Girl Boss Radio, those were both affiliated with networks, and that was something that I did very consciously. I think the indie route is so admirable, but I really liked the idea of being kind of protected by a network, because they just have the infrastructure for the most part in place, knowing how much to pay a producer, having a senior producer that you can regularly work with, also who you can learn from and that can train you. I kind of wanted to just learn from as many people as possible, and so I tried to find work that had that infrastructure in place. So in my situation, I was really, in terms of payment structures, I could charge by the hour, I could charge by the day, or I could charge per episode. And so for Girl Boss Radio and Adam Ruins Everything, I charged basically per episode, and they were also pretty easy episodes to turn around, so it wasn't like there'd be extra work beyond that set price involved. I did work on a show for veterans, about telling veteran stories for Panoply called Battle Scars, and for that show I actually charged, charged a per day amount. And so then I also had to make sure that I was actually measuring my time correctly and was using the correct tools to get my, account for my time appropriately.
Can we, I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot for this, but can we get like a range of what you were charging, like maybe per day or per episode? So people
Sure,
are
yeah. I mean, and then like I also have done per project too, and I can go into that. So, and it also depends if you're working with a company in like a for-profit company, or if you're working for an organization, a public radio organization. I will say I'm not the best at negotiating, so this is also a good lesson to you to maybe not do what I did. So by the end of Adam Ruins Everything, I was making $8.50 per episode. That was a bi-weekly show. For Girl Boss Radio, I was charging $600 per episode, and I would never do that now, but I was so green, and I was kind of like James, where I was just like, yeah, of course I'll do it, give me anything, and I just didn't want to cause waves. I had even had a situation once before with a freelance project where I tried to negotiate, and they took the offer away from me, and I think I was like really intimidated and scarred by that experience. But then by the end of my freelancing, I worked on a project for leanin.org, and I charged, it was a project, and I charged $20,000. So
How many episodes?
that was 10. So, but yeah, I don't know.
That's awesome. So I made my own show called The Competition, and it's like a documentary series that follows a real obscure competition from beginning to end. It was inspired by like RuPaul's Drag Race and Top Chef and Great British Bake Off. That's all I watch when I go home. I can't. So, and the first season, and it goes back to networking. So we got our first episode done. It was a team of 3, me and 2 other producers. And we had all these interviews from, our first season was about the Van Cliburn piano competition. And I was attracted to it because it was 18 to 30-year-olds who compete in like a American Idol style piano competition. And whoever wins becomes this major celebrity in the classical music world. I used to play classical music, and like the audience is not young. And so it's interesting to see that these young people are trying to make it in a career that ultimately their peers aren't into. So we made our first episode. We interviewed all these people from around the world. That was not easy, and we did it all for free. And I had somebody that I made a show before, and I pitched it to them at APM, American Public Media, which is a company I work at-ish. And they rejected that first one, but when I came back to them with this one, they're like, holy crap, like this is an idea. And luckily they have a classical music show at this company, and they're like, okay, we're gonna exclusively sponsor you for this season. They paid $7,000 up front for us to make this entire season. They required us to fly to Texas and back. And that's kind of what catapulted us in terms of money-wise. Like, we're able to pay for everything and also make some money on our own. And it got a lot of attention, which was great. So we just released our second season, and we did a complete 180 and did a leather daddy competition, which is a lot of fun. And that one, we actually didn't look for sponsors. We all work at companies, and we all have full-time jobs, and we just don't have time to do it, because marketing a podcast, writing all these press kits, and making it, and then you're doing that when you go home when you're really tired and it's 8 p.m. and you're like, I now have to open up my computer and start editing. Like, it's exhausting, and the last thing you want to think about is money. And so for us, our main goal was just to get as much attention as possible. And luckily, there's other ways to make money, which for us this season was getting featured on other podcasts. So they'll pick up your episode and go, we want this piece, and then they'll pay you for it. So we just got featured on WNYC. We've been featured on Nancy. And then we got, we were featured on CBC as well. And all these places that we're featured on, they would pay us, and that doesn't take that much work. So that's kind of been our goal, is to raise that audience number, because once you start getting into getting sponsors, you need at least, I would say, $20,000 to make some good money. If you don't have that, it's a bit more difficult to make money off of your podcast.
So going off of that, let's talk a little bit about sponsorship decks and getting sponsors or companies or even really rich individuals to pay for your show. What is your one piece of advice when it comes to sponsorship decks and getting someone's attention so that they'll give you their money? Start whatever order. Sherry, you want to start? Let's go middle first.
Sure. I mean, I would just say one thing is to have a very clear and concise idea of what your podcast is. I mean, they want to just be able to figure it out immediately. The other thing that I would say is that they want to, this goes for sponsorships, but this also goes for when you're pitching to a network as well. But they want to see longevity. They want to see what you can do not only on episode 1, but they want to see what you can do on episode 8, because they want to know that there's a future, and they can invest in you, and they can get a return on that investment if they go into multiple seasons with you.
I can speak from the perspective of working at Crooked Media and being on the development team, especially the latter half of my internship there, so like November, December. So on that side, right, so we're at a company, right, who then has lots of money, as you guys are probably aware of, right? And so thinking about what does it look like when we're sort of sourcing ideas out there, and not so much like big celeb names or sort of like influencers that you kind of are already familiar with that were already on our network, but thinking about more indie podcasts that would be really great and could potentially benefit from the Crooked brand. And I think as we're sort of going through that process of like looking at different, I can't go into too many specifics, but different sort of indie podcasts for a very particular genre, we were thinking about what their mission was and thinking about who their audience is and how they engage with their audience. So I guess if I were to give advice to someone who's sort of trying to pitch a big brand like Crooked, I would say know your audience, right? Like, you know Crooked Media, you know that they are unabashedly, right, left-leaning, democratic, right? They're all kind of like former Obama staffers. So it's like you have to know your audience as well. And I think also, and I think we talked about this when we were out for drinks, something that Crooked and probably other companies as well, when they're thinking about who the sponsors are, think about breaking down who your audience is. So when you're pitching it to X, Y, and Z company to potentially be a sponsor, right, for your marketing deck or whatever it is, think about how you're describing your audience. Is it by age? Is it by geography? Is it by ethnicity? I mean, it can go as sort of like technical as thinking about education level and income level. And all of those really help you to understand not only your own audience, but as you're pitching it to a potential company, they know, okay, we don't have this, you guys are reaching the audience that we really want to tap into. So I think knowing your audience in the sense of who you're pitching it to, but also who you sort of are hoping to sort of engage with your actual content as well.
It's something that Misha and I do at KPCC when we're making a show and it gets time to make the sponsorship deck, is we look at what other shows are similar to our shows. Well, and the very successful kind. So we did a true crime podcast, and we just looked at the most successful true crime podcast. What are those advertisers? So when you're reaching out, you want to reach out to those advertisers who are already advertising on shows that sound like you. It makes the pitch much more easier, and they'll understand it. They're like, oh, when you say, we're making a true crime show, it sounds like Serial, it sounds like Atlanta Monster, it sounds like whatever, in the dark. And all of a sudden, that heavy lifting is not as hard.
So one of the important parts of getting a big audience and making money is getting the attention of press, right? The more write-ups that you get, the more newsletters you're featured in, the more influencers are talking about your podcast, the more likely it is that you will also make more money off of it. So give me one quick hit piece of advice on what you have, could, or would do to get the attention of press, and maybe name some of the outlets that people should be thinking about that are writing about podcasts more and more.
So we just went through this, making one thing is make a press kit and make it really, really nice. That is like, you have your logo there and it's made and it looks really nice and beautiful. You should have a bio about what your show is, an outline of what your episodes are and the release dates. You want to get very specific as possible. So it sounds like you know what you're doing. And again, I think Gabby was saying it, or Shara, about longevity. It was Shara. Yeah. About longevity. They want to see that there's a long-lasting kind of show. And getting that press kit is so important because when you're sending it out to people, it's automatically going to send out. Like, it's going to stand out. So places like Knitqua, Hot Pod, I don't know how familiar everyone is with that.
Can you like raise your hands if you know what Hot Pot is?
Yeah.
Okay, so do you want to explain it?
Yeah, Hot Pod is like Knitqua, I would say, is kind of almost like a gatekeeper, a podcast. If he writes about you, you will see a huge jump in your numbers, or at least just in your own cachet in the industry. Everybody reads Hot Pod who is a part of the industry of podcasting. So getting his attention and having him write about you. Knitqua, so Nicquah, and Hot Pod is kind of his newsletter that everyone reads. That's one big thing for him to kind of shout you out. There's other places like Audible Feast, Bellow Collective, help me out.
CBC.
Yeah.
The podcast playlist.
Yeah, podcast playlist. NPR, they usually do some write-ups. But the other interesting thing for you to do is just Google best podcast of 2018. See who wrote articles about that and reach out to those people. Yeah, because then, they're already writing about podcasting. You have people like The Atlantic writing about it, New York Times, New Yorker. Reach out to those people.
Yeah, Sarah Larson is at the New Yorker. Couple things. Of course it helps if you have a big name as your host. I know that that's not always possible. You can also have, you can have big guests too, but again, that's not always possible. That's kind of like the ideal situation. For Battlestars, for example, that was a really small show, and we were in charge of all of our press. And so that was a podcast about telling veteran stories. Well, we just also reached out to veterans groups and let them know about our show and that, you guys should listen. So we would just reach out to the media people of different veterans organizations. So that's something that I think you can do. And again, reaching out to, some of those gatekeepers. But we also just reached out to other random outlets. My managing producer was in London, and so he wrote to the Financial Times and I think had a connection there. So we were just sort of using any kind of connection possible. And then the last thing that I would say is to two more things. The cross promo thing, James, that you mentioned, that is so key. If you can get your podcast into another outlet's feed and see if you can cross promo in some way, whether it's getting your guests onto another show or getting that episode into their feed, that will help so much. And then the final thing I would say is just to also be explicit of what you want your listeners to do. If you have some listeners, also utilize them to help spread the word. One thing with Sophia on Girl Boss Radio that I was always really impressed by was that, she knows how to market. And she would just be extremely explicit and say, hey guys, I want you to subscribe now, and I want you to tell all your friends about it, and get this thing. I want to get it onto the top 100, iTunes charts. And she would just say that, and she was unabashed about it too. She wanted to play that game, and she, wasn't afraid to say it. So that's another thing.
I keep thinking just about being authentic and being clear about what your goals are, right? Whether you're on the production side, so behind the scenes, or if you're the host. But also just the gatekeepers that we're all mentioning, we can all think about the best of list that we sort of read. That also looks a very certain way, right? They're white and male typically, right? So I'm just thinking about You Had Me at Black. Even though we sort of made IndieWire's 2018 best episodes of the year list, I think that, and this is right, just coming from an indie sort of podcast perspective, no sort of network backing, we have a very clear mission to sort of not just tell Black millennial narratives, but also to have them produced by Black millennials and to have the companies that we're partnering with to reflect those values as well. So our goals can be very different than someone who's trying to pitch to crooked media, right? And there's nothing right or wrong about it, but the gatekeepers are going to be different depending on what your goal is, right? I may say we should partner with Blavity, right? They're a huge company, VC-backed, based here in downtown LA that focuses also on Black millennials and politics and news and culture, but that may not be the audience that you need for another podcast about I don't know, light bulbs or whatever. So, just think about what your goals are, right? And I think that I think as you're sort of defining your goals, you'll also be able to clearly define like who the gatekeepers are, or who you want to sort of create as the gatekeepers as well. And I think that also ties in well with your point of really leveraging your audience, right? So that's engaging with them on Instagram, on Twitter, right? Making very clear asks, like, hey y'all, after this episode, like Martina Abrams, she founded You Have Me in Black, you'll hear her voice at the end of every episode, and she's telling you a very clear message and asking a very clear question, which is, can you take some time to share this on your feed, right? Can you take time to donate because we're looking for funds? Or can you make sure you purchase a ticket to our next live event? So find ways to actually engage your audience and then also hear what they want, right? And you get a sense of the companies that they're interested in. There's only so many mattress companies that we can really pub on podcasts. We can only buy one mattress to sleep on, right? So it's like there's so many other companies that are doing so many other great things. So just think about who your audience is, think about your goal at the end of the day, and let that sort of be authentic to how you shape who you reach out to and who you define as gatekeepers.
I love that. Let's talk a little bit about full-time jobs. How have you all transitioned from freelance work to full-time work or full-time work to freelance work? And what are the lessons you've learned along the way, specifically about negotiating and about making money go a long way when it's a rare commodity?
Yeah, I guess I can start. Well, like I said earlier, I went full-time in the summer, and after having been freelance for about 4 years or so, and so I felt very grateful. I was really getting burnt out after being freelance for a while. It was just exhausting, and you mentioned this earlier, James, how much you were hustling and you had these day jobs, and I was doing a lot of kind of side gigs as well. And so I slept for a long time. I felt like I got really tired and my body just let me sleep for a bit. But in terms of negotiating, I can't get into some of those specifics, but what I will say is that there are different things that you can negotiate on that aren't just about your salary. And I think that that's something important to keep in mind, especially when you're dealing with startups or public media, and they might not be able to budge on salary. So you can also think about vacation days. You can also think about more mental health days and things like that. Those were things that definitely came to mind for me, and that was really important. So yeah.
Sorry about all the construction, guys. They're filming an Amazon commercial here.
So for my case, what's interesting is so I went from, so my first role was at Michigan Radio while I was a graduate student, and I was a really lucky graduate student that I had a fellowship and I had a stipend. So I was looking at nice, real cushy grad school life, so I had a paid sort of internship, which they call production assistant at all your NPR stations. Crooked is why I moved back home. My mom is here. Gotta just shout out the lovely mother here, right? But I know that, thank you guys. But I know not everyone is lucky to sort of have that kind of one relationship with their parent or someone like that. I can move back home, and she's totally understanding. I'm switching careers. I need some time to sort of get my money back up. This is the first time I've never really sort of had the salary, very sort of traditional kind of 9 to. Well, it's never 9 to 5 in politics, but you know what I mean? So it's never been a traditional sense, but I've always been comfortable and confident knowing what I was taking home each week or each month. And so I've been really thankful that when I came to Crooked, it was a paid internship. I think I started out and it was $12 an hour when I started, and then maybe I think late November all of a sudden it went up to $13.25, right, which is still not living wage, and so we were very vocal about that too. And so that can only afford so much as well. But I think now that I'm kind of at the point, especially this year, in conversation with people and they're asking my rate, I've already done what I told you guys earlier. I've already thought about what do I need to live Gabrielle's best life every month, right? And so that looks a certain way for me, and I've been clear what my goal is for this year, the 75 and 80 mark for annual salary. And so being very comfortable and confident with that, but also relying on a really awesome tribe of people who are this is, yep, you're right on, or this makes sense, or think about this when you're sort of thinking about maybe the non-sort of traditional aspects you can kind of negotiate. PTO? Are you sort of providing the Adobe suites that I can then use for editing? Are you providing, like, all of those things that you don't really think about but end up having a really nice, big, hefty price tag? So that's sort of my transition from going from, like, out of this industry to sort of like a full-time intern for an entire year, and now I'm like, okay, let's get to this money and let's talk real business.
One thing that I'll add to that too, of just non-traditional things, is that I didn't say before, is that maybe you can still freelance. Now, I've heard that too.
But not like a non-competitive clause, like see if that's
exactly.
Right.
Yeah, so that was actually funny. When I started full-time, I actually, like, one of my freelance projects hadn't ended yet, and I wasn't willing to give that up. And so I just, that was something that was important to me, to be able to finish that up and to get the paycheck that I wanted, to have, a more comfortable salary. And I think that's something, as long as it's not competitive, that should be something that you should ask for.
Yeah, I know a lot of people who have been freelancing as long as I've been in this business. It is really difficult to get a full-time job in radio and podcasting. Like, no matter what people say, it is really, really hard. It's super competitive. People are very cutthroat. I'm not gonna lie. I mean, that's the reason why I left and had to come back, and I had to go to a small town and come back. Like, for me, I will say the way that I went on the fast track is truly because I made something that people liked, that I had my name on as a creator. That was the fast track to everything, because doing all these other jobs, freelancing, and Shara and Gavin can both talk about it, like internship and freelancing, it can only get you so far, and people aren't gonna take you so seriously. And with freelancing, they're gonna treat you like crap, because everybody wants to be a freelancer. They want to get some sort of cash-making podcast or radio, and ultimately you can get one of these freelance jobs, they have an end date, and they're like, see ya. There's no health benefits, there's none of that. And that's something that, it's a world that I'm not comfortable in. I tried it and I was terrified because, I needed health benefits, I needed a regular salary, it just freaked me out. And so, the main success I've seen is really when I was very much goal-oriented and said, I'm going to make a show that people will like, that these specific people will like. Like Gabby's saying, making something for a very specific audience. If you want to make a comedy podcast, make the best comedy podcast. If you make an investigative journalism podcast, make the best one. Always make the best that you can. Don't make something that you're like, because of the resources you can't make something good. When you want to put your name on it, you make sure that it's damn good, because that's going to make the difference from someone who does freelancing for something and then you going like, well, I made this. And honestly, Misha can probably talk a little bit about that. Making her own project and then being taken very seriously because of it.
You want me to talk?
Yeah, you can. I feel like you should.
That's a really broad question, but I think the first thing that I say is, like, do a story that only you can do. I think that's the key. Whatever the format is, whatever, whoever you end up working with, whatever the topic might be. Right now, there's a guy named Jonathan Hirsch who started his own company, podcasting company, and it's doing really well. Pallavi's here, who works for Neon Hub, she's over there. But he did a podcast about growing up in a cult. And, maybe there are a couple other people who can make a podcast about that, but he's probably one of the very few people who can. And my show was about being an immigrant and not knowing how to do anything because I wasn't born here. And I don't know if I just created a fake reason to blame everything on, or if that was actually the reason, but either way, like, it was me figuring out, like, why don't I know how to ride a bike? And why don't I know how to swim? And realizing that, there are a lot of other people who don't know how to do things. And this is a universal thing that also appeals to a niche audience. And here's the money part of it. People love swimsuits and people love buying bikes, and there are products that are part of this whole thing. And so I specifically targeted companies that, were relevant to the episode that I was doing. And it's not that I started with that in mind, but I had money on my mind from the beginning. And that's one of the reasons why I kind of had the hustle to be like, okay, if this is the content of the episode, who can I reach out to? And as a success story, I ended up making $21,000 from the show from 8 episodes, which is not a lot of money, but I think there's more money in podcasting. But it's more money than a lot of independent creators are able to make. I don't know. that's all I got for now. But yeah, I think getting back to charging for your time, I'm kind of interested in, like, now you guys are all becoming industry leaders, and people are reaching out to you and asking you for advice, and you're starting to get into consulting work. And I'm sure there are people here in this room who are thinking about consulting maybe currently or in their future. And I've found it to be a very blurry line between, like, talking to someone for an hour for free and helping them, and at some point being like, wait, I charge for this. Like, this is what I do for a living. So tell me about your experiences. What are the ranges in which you do charge, and how do you draw that line?
Mine's a quick answer. I'm still in a very blurry spot. So I have a really good friend of mine, and she has another friend, and they decided they wanted to create a podcast, and they're still thinking about it. And so it was sort of like, hey, Gabrielle, come on over one Sunday. And I'm like, sure, just got a cute backyard, cute dog and stuff. So I'm like, okay. And I thought it was gonna be a cute little, I should have known better, but I thought it was gonna be a cute little, like, 1 hour combo. But it ended up being like 3 hours. And then I ended up realizing they were on an email thread. And then, like, okay, this email thread's like going throughout the week. And like, okay, we're meeting next Sunday with the dog, and it's cute and everything. And the husband's bringing out nice coffee for us. And I love her as a friend, right? But I think because they were still in the ideation phase, had never created a podcast, had no experience, but knew that I had, at that point I probably had like 9 months worth of experience in this space. And also really did use your, your How to Make a Podcast guide, which is free, you can download it. It's amazing, right? So I used that, took nuggets from that. It's just brilliant to sort of help people really organize their thoughts and really create something that's meaningful. I realized, and I think she knew, and we kind of talked about it, I was like, well, there's clearly no money, right? We're not talking about any money at this point. There's no money to be made at this point. It's still like all of these ideas, and they're kind of jumbled, and trying to figure out what is the best story to tell, if there's even one to tell. And I think we just kind of like came to this agreement, like, I love you as a friend, and I know right now there's no money, but like, later down the line, we should start thinking about, once we sort of have a clear idea of what this podcast would be, thinking about what the monetization scheme would look like. It's sort of reaching out, it's like a health-related podcast, so it's like, is it reaching out to this organization or this foundation here in California? And so there's been conversations about the money aspect, but for instance, she emailed me, I think it was earlier this week or last week, it's like, hey, can we start reconvening again? And I sat on it for a couple of days, because it's like, I'm a very blunt person, as my family and friends like all know. And I was like, how do I convey this in like a really nice but cheerful Happy New Year kind of way? And so eventually I was just like, hey, hey, what's going on? I was like, right now my focus for the first few weeks of the new year is to secure, salary paying sort of like production/editorial roles in the industry. I said, so let me get back to you by the end of the month. So that lets her know my priority is getting to this money, but I also really am still, I still am supportive of what you're doing, but let me figure out my money situation so I can live and thrive, and then I can reconvene. So I'm kind of in that blurry spot, but I kind of put my foot down, and I felt like, okay, and she responded really nicely, and it was great, and so we're still friends, but I'm not doing that anymore, as of right now, That's my very honest response to that question, but I'm curious to hear y'all's suggestions.
I mean, mine's not super different from yours, unfortunately. Like, I would say, just you need to develop just a hard line and respect your own time. Because I had a situation like that too, where towards the end of freelancing, I was like, oh, I can charge people for my advice. Let me put that on my website. And there was this tech company that was working on an app about like helping people get over their breakups or something, and they wanted to create a podcast. And they contacted me and they were like, hey, can we talk? And I said, yeah, that's fine, but I charge for this. And they said, oh, don't worry, it's just a preliminary call. No. Because, yeah, then I got on the call with them and they're like, this is our podcast, what do you think of it? What do you do? Tell me about yourself. But it was like, give me some advice essentially. And so it feels confusing and almost manipulative where you start talking and you're like, when does this end? And so what you have to do is just say from the get-go, tell me about yourself, I'm going to tell you about myself, and tell me about your services, or tell me about what you need, and I can tell you my services of what I can offer. And if you'd like to proceed, then I charge X amount an hour. And don't let the conversation proceed after 5 minutes. And just, you can be very nice and professional about that. And the thing is that a lot of these companies are like, oh, she's so professional and businesslike, and then they probably like that even more in this really weird way. When we were out at Drinks though last week, one thing I mentioned though is that it's a kind of hard line for me is that I would want to charge, but then I have people who would, who are new in the industry and would want to take me out for coffee or something like that, or ask me for advice about, my experience in the industry. And I know people who charge for that too, that's a consulting fee, and that is very reasonable too, that is your time, and as a freelancer, it's even more important. And that was something that I struggled with because when I was freelance, I was asking people to do the same thing, and I'm so grateful that people met with me, and I would maybe pay for the coffee, but I don't know that I could do that much more to pay for a consulting rate. And for me, it was always really important it is important for me to mentor women and women of color and just people up and coming in the industry who might need some help. And so I always find it to be this other kind of blurred line there where I want to be respectful of my time, and I think this is more pressing as a freelancer. I feel a little less adamant about that now, but as a freelancer, that was more of a struggle.
Can we get a time check? Anybody in the audience just
Ready.
Oh, great. Okay, cool. James, you want to add something to this? No? Are you good?
I'm good.
Okay, so we're going to open up to all of your questions, but just a qualifier. So I've gone to a lot of panels, and this is why I did this, because I've been to a lot of bullshit panels where people ask a lot of bullshit questions, and they'll get up and they'll plug their own thing for like a minute and a half, or they'll just like talk about themselves. So we're not going to do any of that today. I want you to ask a really short, precise question. And the more specific it is, the better. If you have questions about specifics about money, like how much are you charging, whatever, like talk about a specific project that they've worked on. They've given you a lot of raw material, so if you need a minute to think. But when you're ready, just raise your hand, and I'll bring the microphone. Okay, great. Sorry for the little lecture, but...
Hi, my name is Justin, and I'm wondering for indie podcasts, for any of you, the marketing to get more listeners using like paid advertising on social media. Have you guys had any success with that using like Facebook advertising or Instagram advertising? And yeah, very specifically about that.
Okay. We did some paid advertising when I was at when I'm at KPCC. We did some paid advertising. We didn't see a lot of benefit in that. I think we all mentioned up here that the biggest way to get a lot of downloads is really to reach out to podcasts that are similar to yours that have much larger listenerships, and either do a cross promo, whether it be, hey, like if you give my podcast a shout out, like I will do X, Y, and Z for you. I know my show is small, but that would mean a lot. And a lot of that really is just on who you know, but also if your content's really good and they appreciate it and they like it. The other bigger jump is if you get your podcast or you yourself featured on a bigger podcast. Like I wouldn't count so much on paid advertising, and I think that you can spend your money elsewhere. I just like for me that's never really worked. But it's really the key one is just getting featured on other podcasts. That's the biggest boost that you can see.
I want to just give a great example of that, because I feel like just someone who's like new to the industry, there's all this like lingo, not that you're talking like another language, like there's all this like kind of language that sometimes it's like, well, what does that mean exactly? What does that sound like exactly? And really because you mentioned this, which I think is such a brilliant idea, I'm also going to take it back on Sunday for like part of IIT's for having me in Black. But like one episode I can think of in particular, so KCRW had a podcast called Bodies. And and one of their episodes, I think it was number 2. So it kind of basically is like an individual explores a question they have about their body. And I feel like all the episodes were all women identifying. Yeah, female identifying people. And so they explore these questions, right? Where it gives you kind of like this history, you learn about who they are as people. It's just this beautiful narrative form, right? But anyways, I never listened to Bodies, the podcast. I listened to The Nod, which is a Gimlet media podcasting company, and The Nod is sort of all about sort of like Black folks, Black history, but like in this like in this really cool, dynamic way. So you really never know what you're gonna get with The Nod each episode. But I heard Bodies because they said, hey y'all, we're gonna feature this episode of Bodies about this Black woman who had these really heavy periods. She was trying to get to the bottom of it. It was talking about the medical industry, all this really great stuff, not great stuff, all this really insightful stuff. And so from that, I then learned about Bodies. And then when I met Allison, who's behind the Bodies podcast, she was talking about how that was so phenomenal for them to reach a completely different audience, right, on a platform that was explicitly kind of like about Black stories and Black narratives. And so I think that's a really good example if you want to go sort of like hear what that sounds like to have a podcast episode featured on another one. But I know we don't do that yet at You Have Me at Black, but that's a good idea. Most of our monies come from live events that we've had across the country, pretty much a lot of the big cities and whatnot. But now we're thinking about new ideas, and I know that we haven't done paid advertising on social. We're just sort of active on Instagram and also on Twitter, but I haven't seen or heard any sort of one talk about in the early seasons anything about paid advertising.
So they play a whole episode.
They play the full episode of that Bodies, but I guess it's different for each podcast because maybe they'll do a part of a segment or they'll have the host on or something of that nature. But this one I'm talking about, they have the full episode on, and it's like for hear more, go to KCRW's page or download the Bodies podcast.
So we're gonna do another question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Limited time. No, but yes, meet after and talk more, please.
Yeah.
I'll let Gary go, and we're gonna do this really fast.
What percentage of the listening audience is male?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't know my breakdown of that. I haven't looked that up, but yeah, so I can't answer that. You know, for KPCC, at least when we did our project, it was heavily skewed. Oh, you know what? No. So I used to work on a show called Dinner Party Download, and that was a national syndicated show. And it's 2 male hosts, both straight, and the majority of our listenership, we got this data from Facebook, through our Facebook page and people who are active on our Facebook. The majority of people there who are active were actually female. So that was kind of interesting.
Let me just ask the second part of it. And what percentage of the audience do you think are people my age, boomers?
Oh.
I can't give numbers at all from my time at Cricket.
What is your sense, though?
It also depends, I think, on the content, but I'll tell you from like the Cricket side, it's definitely more like millennials. That's sort of who we're kind of catering towards, but also like that's who's also like listening and downloading. That's from that Cricket perspective.
Yeah, so Edison Research does a survey every single year where they break down the audience numbers. In terms of an older demographic, it skews much less. The highest demographic is between the 18 to 39 range, I want to say. That's like your primo audience demo for podcasts.
Go for it.
As somebody who would be a freelancer but also has a full-time job and you want to shop your podcast around to WNYC, your press kit, your synopsis, etc., how much of each episode do you actually do prior to shopping it to someone? Because that does take a lot of work and investment of time. So do you kind of just have a very great layout of each episode so people are like, all right, I can kind of see how that'll look? Or do you actually record a few? Or how does that look?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And it all depends on one, the relationship you have with that person. For me, when I was doing the competition, I made the first episode completely. And that's when that's kind of, we're just mainly looking for advertisers and also places to pick us up. So we got offers from a couple places. One who actually wanted to pick up our show, which was a very big podcast network, and then the other who wanted to be the exclusive sponsor. We decided to do the terms is what we're going to go for, but it really helped when we made our first actual episode. There's another podcast I'm currently working on. That one I didn't really record up until recently, but I've been making it for a few years now. And that one got more attention just because I needed treatment. So that one's a fiction show, and so that's why it's a bit harder to kind of make the show because you have to cast the actors and do all those things. But I made a very detailed treatment of what it would be like And I just shopped that around, and that actually is what kind of helped me. So I didn't record anything from that. So it really depends on what show you're making, the networks, and then ultimately your body of work. If you do have a lot of body of work that kind of speaks that you can produce something and make something really great, you don't have to show as much.
I mean, I would say the less that they maybe know about you, the more helpful it is to produce something. Whether it's sharing your other work, but I do think the ideal situation is to share the first episode or even a trailer, just so they can get a feel of what the podcast will be.
I agree. Just to go off of the trailer thing, because that's something to add, you can get a lot of attention from just a trailer. I will let you ask your question in a second. But when I first started making my podcast, I didn't actually know how to edit anything that was longer than a minute and a half. So I just made a trailer and then put it out on that radio listener that we were talking about. And the people from Reply All were on the radio listener, and I didn't know, and they liked it, and they shared it, and I will not lie, it's an incredible trailer, but at that point, like, I didn't know how to make anything good beyond that point, you know? So they liked it, they shared it in their newsletter, and we got like 15,000 listeners just from the trailer. So then when I went to sponsors, I all of a sudden was like, here I have this piece of audio, and here's how many people are listening to it, and here's who they are, and this is why you should sponsor me, because I'm nobody and I got 15,000 listeners, so clearly I know what to do. So I think sometimes that can put the fire under your ass, but it can also get the attention that you need in order to make money from something, and to sell your show to people.
In terms of getting a new podcast up and running off the ground, right? Sometimes podcasts are great platforms to start getting ideas out there. So in the inception, when you don't have a big name host, maybe not even a co-host, and you don't have really a solid guest list, is monologuing kind of taboo and you're dead in the water? You need to wait to have dialogues and conversation developed, or is that something you could possibly break into?
Okay, so I'll just say, because when I started the podcast on the Homemade News, which was the show on the pirate radio station, like, we did not have any connections really. And I mean, I did have a co-host, so there was someone who I could talk to, but in terms of getting guests, you'd be surprised how many people will say yes. Like, a lot of people want to talk and they want to talk about themselves. And so if you just pitch them and say, you know, here's my show, here's why I want to talk to you specifically. I mean, the other thing too is that when you're pitching someone, you want to make sure that you do your homework about them and you make them feel special to say, oh, you know, we've read this, and we think you'd be great for our show for this, and this reason. I mean, I remember we got this woman on the show, and I'm blanking on her name now. She testified before Congress because she wanted birth control to be part of the Affordable Care Act. And then at that point she was running for Congress in California, or state senate, maybe state senate. But she was like a bigger name. And we wrote her, and somehow we got her on our podcast, and she came to our dingy pirate radio station. Like, it kind of looked like a crack den. Like, it was kind of embarrassing. Like, I felt like we were catfishing her or something. But, you know, we pitched her and it worked out. So I would also say, and what I will say too, is that when you start, you can start lower and then like build up from that. Like, at one point we did an episode about like weed in California. I mean, this was like 2014 or something. And we ended up interviewing the first marijuana critic of the Denver Post. I mean, that's not a famous person, but that's someone who's interesting. And then you say, when you're pitching the next person, oh, we got this person who's this, and this person as well. And then that person will say, oh, that person is kind of intriguing. And so then you kind of build it slowly that way.
So we have another question back there.
It's just a guest sourcing hack. I was at it, it's actually perfect. There's this place called Be My
myguest.fm. It doesn't cost us anything as podcasters, and they have elite guests. And so if you just go to bemyguest.fm, the guys that own the thing, they're super rad. That's it, if you want guests.
We're gonna take one more question back there.
Hello. I have a question kind of about collaboration. James, you said something interesting about, I think on your second season of the competition that it sounded like you were working with other people. So do you find it's more possible, especially if you have a job that you're working or many jobs, that you're working with other people versus working by yourself?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, actually in our team of 3 has been together since season 1. And I like working with other people because I like bouncing ideas off other people, and there's also kind of another say in terms of like, is this good? Like you don't the questioning of doubt isn't as strong when you have other people involved, especially people that you trust. And so for that, like the way it went about was, at least for the competition, we basically got together because we all worked on the same show at KPCC. We all kind of understood each other, had a similar vibe, similar editing style, and we all just naturally hung out. And ultimately, in the end, I was brewing on this idea, and I knew that doing a podcast where I'm following an actual major event, especially in the classical music world and flying to Texas, I just couldn't do that on my own. And it helped that I worked on other shows to know what specifically I needed help with. And so bringing these 2 people on, I was like, I set the terms up right at the beginning. Like it was my idea, so I'm like, I'm bringing you on because I need you to do this, and I'm bringing you on because I need to do this. So ultimately I had one person do it, and like, you're the editor of the podcast. We're gonna make me and this other person, we're gonna co-write these episodes, and then we're gonna come to you and you're gonna have the final say. And then we flip that for season 2. So it really helps when you are collaborating with people that you do have designated things you want them to do, because otherwise like it could go south. And so being upfront as much as possible really does help.
So I'm so sorry.
Oh.
We're super low on time, but I told you guys they're going to be really interesting. So make sure to introduce yourselves to them. And thank you all so much for coming. We have one last thing to do. We promised you a microphone giveaway, so we're going to do that. Adam, you want to come up here and do it?
Here, so the one winner, the random winner is Misha.
Thank you all so much for coming. I wish we had 10 hours to do this because they have so much amazing advice, and you all have great no bullshit questions. So keep them coming, get their contact info, find them on Twitter, Google them, stalk them, don't stalk them too much, and reach out to them. They will help you, and maybe they'll charge you money. I don't know, but thank you so much again, and all of you will be emailed certain specific materials based on the stuff that we talked about that could help you in selling your shows and making money. So keep an eye out on your email.
Hi, Allison. Hey.
a little too much about my personal life.
Well, I know as much as we let you know.